Daniela, bonita Bermúdez, Carolina, Puerto Rico, Real de...
Okay, well, as you all may know, I've been meaning to update the women's Ring IQ pound-for-pound list because there has been some noteworthy activity. As you all know, Amanda Serrano took on Daniela Bermudez.
Very recently.
She defeated Daniela Bermudez. We talked about that and how that would reflect on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, that Amanda, beating a smaller fighter moving up in weight, is not a strong enough argument for her to advance ahead of Jessica McCaskill, who's ranked in at number 3, because when Jessica moved up in weight 2 times, she took on naturally bigger world champions, 3 of them, and beat them.
Whereas Amanda was facing a smaller fighter moving up in weight.
And that's not necessarily cause for criticism, facing a fighter that's moving up in weight. Because, fighters move up in weight all the time. I mean, Oscar Valdez moved up in weight a couple of fights ago, very recently took on Miguel Berchelt, and beat him. The same cannot be said for Daniela Bermudez. But once again, it's not cause for criticism that Amanda beat her, per se. It's just that doesn't make the same statement as moving up in weight and taking on world champions that are naturally bigger than you are, the way that Jessica McCaskill did with Erika Farias, with Ana Inés de Sanchez, with Cecilia Breakhouse, who she has now beaten 2 times. The basic idea is that if the fighter is skilled enough, those skills will prevail. Those skills will be enough to compensate for the natural size that they don't have. That's the basic idea here, that if it were Daniela that had won the fight, Daniela, who we know is the naturally smaller fighter, who normally campaigns at 118 and 122 pounds, moving up in weight to 126 for Amanda, if that would have been the case, then there would have been enough precedence there for Daniela to advance on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. But Amanda won the fight, and Amanda wasn't the one that was moving up in weight. Thus, that argument isn't strong enough for her to advance ahead of someone who has moved up in weight at least once or twice.
Became a champion by taking on naturally bigger champions.
It's not a knock on Amanda. It was a quality fight against 2 high-quality fighters, but ultimately, beating a naturally smaller fighter, moving up in weight, doesn't make the same statement that beating a naturally bigger fighter makes. It's the basic idea there.
A lot of people are high off that knockout.
And it really was a highlight reel knockout. 2 very well-placed body shots. But maybe the reason that Jessica didn't knock out Cecilia, didn't knock out Erika, and didn't knock out Anaí is because she moved up in weight to fight those fighters.
She did.
Amanda didn't move up in weight to fight Daniela. Daniela moved up in weight to fight Amanda. Thus, the size has to be accounted for.
Comprendo.
That has to be reconciled. That's not all there is to discuss, folks. There is some movement on the list in the lower tier. Annabelle Ortiz, long-reigning champion Annabelle Ortiz, made an appearance very briefly, the last updated version of the list, but Annabelle Ortiz very recently was unseated by Senicia Superbad Estrada. Annabelle Ortiz, who was WBA's minimum weight champion for something like, 7, 8 years.
Something like 12 title defenses.
She held that title from 2013 till now, till very recently when she locked horns with Senicia Estrada. But, on the premise of her long reign as a champion and her numerous title defenses, she earned a spot in the lower tier of the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, ranking in at number 8. Having lost that fight, per the rules that govern the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, no fighter, absent of a world title, can maintain a spot, and no fighter coming right off of a loss is allowed to maintain a spot as well. Annabelle Ortiz is out, and Senicia Estrada is in, ranking in at number 10, behind Julie Hangaluna and Jelena Marjanovic. The vacant spot left behind by Daniela Bermudez must also be accounted for, per the rules that govern the list. Even though Daniela Bermudez is still the IBF champion at 122 pounds. She is coming right off of a loss, and we don't know how she's going to bounce back from that. We don't know if she's going to bounce back, if she'll rebound off that loss and continue to compete at the level at which she was competing. We won't have those answers until her next ring appearance, her ring return. Here today, we don't know when that's going to be. So for the time being, Daniela Bermudez is out, and Mexico's own Beth Zamora Silva is in. Daniela ranked in at number 6 on the list, and having lost that fight to Amanda Serrano, she ends up getting bumped off. Naoko Fujioka, who was ranked behind her, she advances to that number 6 spot. The vacancy created by the loss is now occupied by Beth Zamora Silva at number 7, 2-division champion Beth Zamora Silva, who held the WBC light flyweight title from 2013 to 2017 and has been the current reigning flyweight champion as of 2018. She is still in possession of that world title,
which she's defended 3 times.
You know, Beth Zamora Silva has some very high-quality wins. A win over Annabelle Ortiz many years ago. A win over Kika Chavez, Mexico's own Kika Chavez. And a win over America's own Ava Knight.
Very recently signed with MTK Global.
And managed to get in 2 fights last year, so the year of 2020 wasn't a complete waste for Beth Zamora Silva. Those things in mind, and that being said, Beth Zamora Silva and Sinicia Estrada are the latest additions to the women's Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. Congratulations to them. And, you know, when it comes to Daniela Bermudez, who's still ranked in on other pound-for-pound lists with, other folks, other periodicals, what have you, it's not that Daniela can't get back on this list. She's still a reigning champion, after all. She's still in possession of a world title. It's just that it's going to take for Daniela to rebound off the loss, per the rules that govern this list. No fighter absent of a world title and or coming right off a loss is allowed to maintain a spot. We don't know how she's going to come back. We don't know if she's going to rebound. We won't know until we find out. So until she does, these are the current ranked standings. In super featherweight news, Oscar Valdez says, I would love to fight Lomachenko, Gervonta Davis, or the Herring versus Frampton winner, Herring versus Frampton, which is set to go down this weekend. Oscar was quoted as saying, definitely. Valdez replied regarding a Lomachenko fight. At the end of the day, fighting is what puts food on the table for my family. And, we want bigger and better fights. I would love to fight with Lomachenko. I would love a fight with Lomachenko or Gervonta Davis or the winner of Carl Frampton and Jamel Herring. The fights that pay more money, those are the fights I would want to have. But also, fights that people want to see, I don't want to fight somebody for the money and then get criticized later in my career saying that I'm ducking fighters or that I'm scared of fighting certain fighters. I'm not scared of fighting anybody, but I would want to get the money fights. Like I repeat, at the end of the day, that's what puts food on the table for my family. Fighting the winner between Herring and Frampton is realistic for Valdez as well, primarily because Top Rank is Herring's promoter and Frampton's co-promoter. Cincinnati's Herring will make an optional defense of his WBO junior lightweight crown against Belfast's Frampton on April 3rd at Caesars Blue Waters, Dubai in Dubai. These quotes from the reigning WBC super featherweight champion Oscar Valdez come as no surprise to me because this is more or less what I told you guys might happen in the weeks and months after the Valdez versus Miguel Berchelt fight. Once that outcome was determined, took a lot of us by surprise. I thought Oscar was going to lose that fight, and he didn't. And because he didn't, and because the wheels are already in motion for so many other things, I figured that not only would Oscar Valdez be in the running for a Lomachenko fight, maybe even a Davis fight, and a fight with the winner of Herring versus Frampton, I also think he's in the running for a Shakur Stevenson fight. But, all of these fights can't happen at the same time.
They can't.
Any one of them could happen in the near future. Some are more likely than others, with the least likely being a Gervonta Davis fight. Gervonta Davis is supposed to be going up to 140 to challenge Mario Barrios for his WBA baby belt. That in unison with the legal troubles that Gervonta Davis is facing that could see him going away for a long time. Something like 7 years, maybe more. I don't even know. I don't view Gervonta Davis as being all that likely to fight Oscar Valdez in the near future, if at all. Vasyl Lomachenko, slightly more possible, but Vasyl Lomachenko hasn't descended from the lightweight division, and the rumor mill states he could be fighting Masayoshi Nakatani in the lightweight division in his very next fight, upon his ring return after suffering that defeat to Teofimo Lopez at 135 pounds. Lomachenko is more likely than Davis, but less likely than the winner of Herring versus Frampton. When it comes to the winner of Herring versus Frampton, I think in either scenario, in either event, regardless of who wins, the winner of that fight is a viable possibility for Oscar. But I'll say that I feel if Jamel Herring wins, the fight is slightly more likely to happen, the fight between Jamel and Oscar. If Carl Frampton wins, it's possible that Oscar fights him too.
It's possible in either event.
It's just that we can't forget about Shakur Stevenson. Shakur wants Oscar. Shakur wants the winner of that fight. But I think that Shakur is less likely to go after the winner of that fight if the winner is Jamel Herring than if it's Carl Frampton. If it's Carl Frampton, I think a fight between Carl and Shakur is a possibility.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know how viable that possibility is, because if you're Carl, you're running risks with Shakur and you're running risks with Oscar. But if you fight Oscar, you're fighting for 2 world titles instead of just one. Instead of just defending your own.
That might influence Carl's decision.
You know that Carl Frampton's entire career, what remains of it, is riding on this weekend's fight, because Carl Frampton, in so many words, said that if he loses to Jamel Herring in Dubai, he's going to retire. And with retirement on his mind, if that's the kind of headspace that he's in at this point in his career, let's just say that he beats Jamel. Let's just say that he wins. Well, the kind of risks he'd take thereafter, I think, might leave him leaning towards Oscar Valdez. Comparable payday, more world titles, more glory.
Even if he would have won this weekend, I don't know how much he'd want to fight Shakur.
It's a tough situation for young Shakur, because at 130 pounds, he's a high-risk, low-reward kind of guy, especially for Carl Frampton, who's attempting to become a 3-division champion. If he does, him being at the tail end of his career, I don't know how much he'd want that fight. I'm not saying that he doesn't want it. I'm just saying that at this stage in Carl's career, he's looking for sight opportunities. I mean, one would think.
One would.
Oscar is willing to fight Carl the same way he's willing to fight Jamel. But if the winner is Carl, and Carl is more receptive to Oscar than he is Shakur, well, that puts Shakur in a compromising situation, a compromising position. That's not saying that there aren't other fights out there for Shakur.
I think getting the winner of this fight could prove to be very tricky.
Because regardless of who wins this weekend, whether it's Jamel or Carl, comparatively, the scalp of Oscar Valdez, that fight is a bigger fight that represents a greater value to the winner of Herring versus Frampton than Shakur Stevenson. Moreover, I think Jamel, if he had to choose, maybe he likes the Valdez fight more than the Shakur Stevenson fight, because those guys are friends. They run in the same cycles. I mean, we have seen in the past how sometimes those friendships outside of the ring can affect things. I just don't know. It's a very convoluted situation. But at minimum, what I'll say is, I think the winner of that fight, regardless of who it is, might view Oscar Valdez as a more attractive option moving forward than young Shakur Stevenson, at which point Shakur might have to look to fight Jojo Diaz.
Might.
Or maybe he can see about getting his hands on the red belt. The red belt, which here today is still vacant as a result of Jojo Diaz having blown the weight ahead of the Rakhimov mandated title defense, which ended up being scored a draw, thus rendering the title vacant even after the fight was over. I think it's going to be tough for Shakur the next couple of fights. I do, because he's a high-risk, low-reward guy. He's a hot potato. And whether the winner of this weekend's fight is Jamel Herring or Carl Frampton, they're likely going to look at Oscar Valdez as a more attractive option moving forward than they will Shakur. So, we'll see what happens.
But it's looking like the world is Oscar Valdez's oyster.
And finally, I'm sure most of you have heard by now, it's official. Jaime Munguia on April 24th is going to be taking on Zhuliaki. Can't say we didn't see this coming. We did, as soon as there was trouble in paradise for the proposed Munguia versus Golovkin fight. And we've talked about all that. Is this a decent fight for Jaime? About as decent as most of his fights. I mean, Jaime, he's a limited boxer, but he's very entertaining to watch. And Zhuliaki, given his hand speed, his height, and his quick 1-2, his boxing, he can make things difficult for Jaime in spots. Jaime has to make this rough and tumble. He has to make this an aggressive, come-forward fight to take Sulecki out of his element, because Jaime is no finesse fighter. And so long as this stays a finesse fight, it's not his fight to win. He's got to take Zhuliaki out of his comfort zone, out of his element. I will say that I view Jaime as being more durable than Maciej Sulecki. I don't think Maciej takes the best punch, and because of that, I anticipate that Jaime might win this thing, and he might win this thing by way of knockout. Should be an entertaining little fight for however long it lasts. And now that we know that it's official, it's definitive, conclusive, Jaime's not fighting Gennady Golovkin. The question is, who does Gennady Golovkin keep busy with? What does he do in the in-between time? There aren't that many names to go around. Andrade is busy. It's not likely that he fights Jermall Charlo next, though I wouldn't mind that. Ryota Murata, I told you before, and I'm going to tell you here again. Tell you here now. It's not likely that Ryota Murata fights someone like Gennady Golovkin off over a year of inactivity. Before it comes to that, Ryota Murata is going to need a tune-up fight.
And given that he's a cash cow in Japan, he's likely to get one.
That leaves Gennady Golovkin with just one or two names to choose from in the middleweight division's top 10 ranked standings. One name that I think makes for a very interesting fight is America's own Rob Brandt, combination puncher, athletic guy. Gave Ryota Murata all he could handle in their first fight, but got knocked on his ass in their second fight. He has rebounded since then. He's back in the winner's bracket, and I could go for Golovkin versus Brandt right about now. Rob was in action the last 12 months. He was in action last August during COVID times. Got himself the W. I wouldn't mind seeing Golovkin versus Brandt in the in-between time. I think that given Rob Brandt's particular characteristics, his qualities, that he can be aggressive, he can be a come-forward fighter, a combination puncher, but he's not limited to being that kind of fighter, it makes for a very interesting situation between him and Gennady Golovkin. And Gennady can't keep scraping the bottom of the barrel anymore. This guy's price tag is far too hefty for him to keep thinking he's going to rack up multi-million-dollar paydays fighting the likes of Steve Rolls and Kamil Zeremata.
He's got to fight somebody interesting.
Yet another possible opponent option, though not as interesting as Rob Brandt, is Australia's own Michael Zarafa. Michael's coming off that win, that knockout win, over a very past-it Anthony Mundine. I think that both Michael and Gennady could do with each other, could do with some more interesting opponents.
Could do with an interesting fight.
They both seem to need one. I mean, how much are you supposed to read in Michael Zarafa knocking out a very over-the-hill Anthony Mundine the way that he did? How much are you supposed to read in Gennady Golovkin pummeling Kamil Zeremata? I mean, you know, those two guys need to step it up. I don't know what Gennady Golovkin's going to do, if anything. I don't.
What I do know is he needs to do something.